There's a word that destroyed this family. Not a weapon, not a motive, not a name, a word. A single medical term that the pharmaceutical industry has spent decades burying in fine print and legal settlements and carefully worded clinical trial footnotes. A word that has walked free from more crime scenes than any detective has ever officially counted. A word that, if it applies to what happened inside that house on Kingston Street on a Sunday night in May, changes absolutely everything about this case. I'm going to give you that word before this video ends. But first I need you to understand something about Matthew Mitchell that nobody in the mainstream press has had the courage to say out loud. This man was not who you think he was. Not the version you read in the headlines. Not the restaurateur. Not the husband. Not even the former pharmaceutical CEO. Though that last detail is the one that should have stopped every investigator in their tracks and didn't. The real Matthew Mitchell. The one that the people a quarter mile from that house in River Oaks are quietly talking about, the one that 3 restaurant owners who knew this family personally are describing behind closed doors, is a man whose full story has not been told yet. And neither has ICE, because there is something about this pregnancy that nobody has confirmed, something about this marriage that nobody has examined, something about the 13 years between them, the age gap that every outlet mentioned once and immediately moved past, that sits at the center of everything that happened on that Sunday night, like a fault line that nobody wanted to stand on long enough to feel it move. I have been inside this case for days. I have talked to people who knew them. I have read the science that explains what may have happened in that house in a way that the police report never will. And what I found, the affair tip that is circulating in Houston right now, the medical angle that forensic researchers have connected to homicides in court of law, the welfare check detail that nobody has slowed down enough to examine, the pharmaceutical history that 14 years of silence has kept invisible, none of it points cleanly in one direction. All of it points at a door that this investigation closed too fast. By the time this video ends, you're going to have a full picture of this case. And it is going to be one that the official version of the story cannot answer. Stay with me, because this one goes all the way down. This is Mistora Crimes. Before we go any further, if you watched Part 1 and Part 2 and came back because something about this case would not let you sleep, you already know why this channel exists. And if this is your first time here, let me tell you something. What we do at Mistora Crimes is not what other true crime channels do. We do not recycle headlines. We do not repackage press releases. We do not accept the first answer we are handed just because it is the most convenient one. We go deeper. We ask the questions that the mainstream press is too comfortable, too cautious, or too rushed to ask. We sit with the cases that deserve more than a 30-second scroll. And we do it for the people whose names are being reduced to crime scene labels when they were, in reality, entire human beings with entire lives and entire futures that someone took from them without permission. Thy Mitchell was one of those people. Maya was one of those people. Max was one of those people. And the baby that never got a name was one of those people. If you believe that they deserve more than a headline, then stop right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to Mistora Crimes. Ring that bell so you never miss a single part of the story as it develops. Because here is something I need you to understand. This investigation is not over. The motive has not been officially released. The financial records have not been made public. The prescription history has not been examined publicly. The unnamed babysitter and the unnamed relative have not given public accounts. The affair tip circulating in Houston has not been confirmed or denied. The paternity of that baby has not been publicly established. Every single door in this case is still open, and the people who walk through them deserve someone willing to keep knocking. Now, let's get into everything that the official version of this story left behind. 10 days before she died, Thy Mitchell posted a video of herself and Matthew smiling together, arms around each other. Happy. The caption read, "He thinks we will grow old together." And then the camera zoomed in on her face, and the next line said, "He will, but I'm Asian." It was a joke about life expectancy, about how Asian women statistically outlive their husbands. People laughed in the comments. People hit the heart. People tagged their friends. Nobody knew they were watching a countdown. That post is 10 days before Sunday night. The dress shopping video with Maya is 2 days before. And somewhere between a joke about growing old together and a welfare check that nobody wanted to make, an entire family disappeared from the face of the earth without a single person in their world seeing it happen. Now, let me tell you what that family actually looked like from the inside, because the press gave you the resume version, the award, the restaurants, the Food Network feature, the MBA, the clothing line, and all of that is real, but it is the surface of a much more complicated picture. Matthew Mitchell was 52 years old. Di Mitchell was 39, 13 years between them, and that gap, dismissed in every single report as an incidental biographical detail, is one of the most psychologically significant facts in this entire case. When Matthew was building his pharmaceutical empire, traveling Europe, working as a journalist in London and Paris, climbing the executive ladder, Di was in her 20s, finding herself, building her identity from scratch as a first-generation Vietnamese-American woman in Houston who was simultaneously working HR for Fortune 500 companies and figuring out what she was actually made of. By the time they came together and built Traveler's Table, by the time the cameras arrived and the awards started and the city started paying attention, Di was becoming something that Matthew, at 52, had already been in past. She was ascending in real time, publicly, unstoppably, board seat, restaurateur of the year, MBA at Rice, clothing line growing, pregnancy, a collaboration dinner being planned, a board seat being offered, a man who built his entire identity around rising to the occasion, watching that happen from inside his own marriage, was either the proudest person in that room or the most quietly threatened one. And that distinction, which one Matthew Mitchell actually was, is the question that nobody in this investigation has officially answered. Let me give you a detail that almost every outlet buried and moved past without stopping. Traveler's Table opened in 2019. That is 6 years. 6 years to build a restaurant empire from zero. 2 locations, a nationally recognized menu, a Food Network feature, a Beat Bobby Flay win, a clothing line, a board seat, an award. 6 years of building something at a speed that most restaurateurs spend entire careers trying to reach. And here's what nobody is talking about. The restaurant industry has a failure rate that should make anyone pause before stepping into it. Roughly 60% of restaurants fail in the first year, 80% within 5 years. The Mitchells beat those odds publicly and visibly and on television. But beating the odds publicly does not mean the financial pressure underneath stopped building. It means the pressure got dressed up in awards and press coverage and Instagram reels and kept going to work every morning looking exactly like success. What were the actual numbers behind Traveler's Table? We don't know. Those records have not been released. What were the debt obligations on 2 restaurant locations in one of Houston's most expensive neighborhoods? We don't know. What did the books look like behind the social media posts? Nobody is saying. And the restaurant's own statement, released after the deaths, specifically said they would not be commenting further because of the ongoing criminal investigation. That is a legally careful statement. That is a statement written by people who have been told to say nothing. Why would a grief statement need to reference a criminal investigation unless there was something in the business that investigators might be looking at? Tips have been circulating, and I want to be completely transparent. That Matthew Mitchell may have had a gambling problem. That significant debt may have been accumulating in private. I searched every credible published source available, and I cannot confirm that. No journalist has reported it. No financial records have been made public, so I will not present it as fact. But here is why I am not dismissing it either. Matthew Mitchell left a high-salary pharmaceutical CEO position to enter one of the most financially volatile industries on earth. 2 locations, a $1.2 million River Oaks mortgage, a clothing brand, a 3rd child on the way, a pregnant wife finishing an MBA. That is an enormous financial load sitting underneath a very polished surface. And the Houston community members who knew this family personally say the restaurants were doing well, which means if there was financial pressure, it may not have been coming from the dining room at all. It may have been coming from somewhere far less visible, far less traceable, and far more dangerous. Here is what the podcast from October 2024 tells us. The last recorded public conversation the Mitchells had together. They appeared on a food podcast called What's Eric Eating? And in that conversation, they talked about the challenges of balancing a restaurant family with their home life. They used the phrase restaurant family, not just a family that owns a restaurant, a family where the restaurant is part of the family's identity, where the business and the relationship and the children and the brand are all one organism. That kind of entanglement is beautiful when it works, and it is suffocating when it starts to crack. Because when your business is your marriage, and your marriage is your identity, and your identity is your public profile, there's no part of your life you can let fail without all of it failing at once. Now I want to go back to that one more time, because I think the way she has been discussing coverage of this case has actually undersold who she was. People keep calling her the warm one, the public one, the face of the restaurants. And all of that is true. But here's what that description leaves out. While she was the face of Traveler's Table, while she was hosting board meetings and doing podcast appearances and dress shopping with Maya, she was simultaneously completing her MBA at Rice University, one of the most competitive business programs in the South, while pregnant, while running 2 restaurants, while grieving the sudden death of her brother-in-law just 2 months before. A colleague called her a Vietnamese superwoman. And that word, superwoman, is one of the most dangerous words you can attach to a woman in a marriage where the power dynamic is already shifting. Because superwoman is another way of saying she needed nothing. She was fine. She had it handled. And women who are labeled superwoman are often the last ones anyone thinks to check on. Because they always look like they are okay. Was I okay? We don't know. Nobody is saying. And in the middle of all the grief, nobody is publicly answering the most important question about Mitchell's private life. What was actually happening inside that marriage when the cameras were off and the restaurant was closed, and it was just the 2 of them in that house on Kingston Street? Because there's a tip circulating, quiet, persistent, unconfirmed, that Mitchell may have been involved with someone outside of this marriage, and that the baby she was carrying when she died may not have been Matthew's. I cannot confirm that. But I need you to hold it, because if it is true, even as a possibility, it reframes every single thing about this case, every angle, every silence, every question we have asked across this entire series. Tips are circulating inside the Houston community, not in published reports, not in official statements, but in the quiet conversations that happen between people who knew this family up close, that Mitchell may have been having an affair, that the pregnancy that every headline described as the detail that made this tragedy more devastating may have been the exact detail that made Sunday night inevitable. I cannot confirm this. No credible source has confirmed this publicly. I am presenting it as what it is, an unverified tip that is persistent enough and specific enough to the community closest to this family, that it cannot simply be dismissed. But here is why it matters beyond the sensational surface of it. If Matthew Mitchell knew or suspected or was made to believe that the baby his pregnant wife was carrying was not his, then what we are looking at is not just a marriage under financial pressure. We are looking at a marriage where a secret of the most intimate and irreversible kind had either surfaced, been discovered, or been deliberately revealed to a man who was already carrying more than anyone around him could see. And in documented, peer-reviewed, repeatedly studied cases, when a man discovers or suspects that a pregnancy is not his, the psychological response can be catastrophic. Not because it excuses anything. Nothing excuses what happened in that house, but because it explains the specific, sudden, complete nature of what happened. No prior calls to police. No visible warning signs. No slow build that anyone could track. Because a secret like that does not build slowly. It detonates. Now here's a question that nobody is asking. If Matthew discovered something, a message, a name, a detail that rewrote everything he thought he knew about his marriage and his unborn child, when did he discover it? Was it weeks before? Days? The night before? Was it something he had suspected for months and finally confirmed on a Sunday night when the children were in their beds and there was nothing left before him for? Or, and this is where this case takes its darkest possible turn, was it something that someone wanted to discover? A carefully placed piece of information, a message forwarded at exactly the right moment, a truth or a lie dressed as a truth, delivered to a man who was already under pressure from every direction. Because here is what a targeted hit requires. It requires a motive that is believable enough to close the investigation before it opens. And a husband who discovers his wife is carrying another man's child. That husband is the most convenient possible suspect in the world. One that requires no further investigation. One that writes his own verdict. Now stop, because this is the part of the story I have been building toward. The part that nobody, not one outlet, not one podcast, not one comment section, has slowed down enough to examine. Let's talk about the welfare check. Not what it found, not what happened after. The welfare check itself. The phone call. Because that phone call has been treated by every single report as the most ordinary thing in the world. A babysitter called. A relative called. Nobody had heard from the family since Sunday night. Officers responded. End of story. Next paragraph. But that welfare check is not ordinary. And the more you look at it, the stranger it gets. Who makes a welfare check call? You make it when a pattern breaks. When the person you're checking on has a rhythm, a daily rhythm, a communication rhythm, and that rhythm suddenly stops. You make that call when your gut says something is not right, and the silence has lasted long enough that you cannot explain away anymore. The official timeline says the family had not been heard from since Sunday night. Officers arrived at 5:26 p.m. on Monday, which means the silence lasted somewhere between 18 and 24 hours before anyone picked up the phone. How many hours of silence from a pregnant woman running 2 restaurants with 2 young children does it take before you call the police? 1, 5, 10? And why did the babysitter and the relative both arrive at that decision at the same time? Did they talk to each other first? Did one call the other and say, "Have you heard from him?" And if they did, what did that conversation sound like in the hours before they made that call? We do not know. Nobody has asked. The babysitter is unnamed in every single report. The relative is unnamed. Their accounts have not been made public. Their timeline has not been examined. They are treated as incidental humans who happen to notice a silence, not as 2 people whose specific knowledge of this family's rhythms was precise enough to know that something was catastrophically wrong. What if the welfare check was not spontaneous? What if someone knew that it needed to happen at a specific time? What if the call was timed, not to find the family alive, but to find them exactly the way they were found? After enough hours had passed that the scene was set, the evidence had settled, and the story had already written itself. Think about what a perfectly timed welfare check accomplishes in a staged murder scene. It controls the discovery. It controls the narrative from the very first moment. And the people who made the call are immediately positioned as grieving, concerned outsiders, rather than anyone whose knowledge of the situation might warrant a closer look. Now, let me layer something on top of that. The relative. That word has been sitting in every report since day one, and nobody has stopped to ask. Which relative? How close? On whose side of the family? Because that distinction matters enormously. A relative on Nice's side has a different set of loyalties than a relative on Matthew's side, a different set of knowledge. A potentially different reason control how and when this family was found, and a different set of things they might know about what was happening inside that marriage in the weeks before Sunday night. And here is what makes this even more significant. Thy sister Lima lost her own husband just 2 months before this happened. February 2026. A sudden brain aneurysm. Lima was already in active grief when her sister died, already in the most vulnerable, destabilized emotional state a person can be in, already dependent on Nye for support, for connection, for family stability. And then, 2 months later, her sister is gone too. That is a woman whose entire world collapsed twice inside 60 days. I am not questioning Lima's grief. It is real and it is devastating, and she deserves every private moment of it. But I am asking a question that investigators should be asking. In the weeks before Sunday night, what was the communication between Di and her sister like? Was there anything in those conversations that suggested I was worried, afraid? Was there anything that I told her sister that she had not told anyone else? And is there anything Lima knows about Matthew, about the finances, about the marriage, about who came and went from that house, about the pregnancy, that she has not yet said publicly because she is processing 2 catastrophic losses simultaneously, and the world has not given her the space to say anything at all? Grieving people are not questioned carefully. They are given condolences and moved past. And that is exactly the kind of environment in which important information stays buried for months or forever. There's also the clothing line that nobody is examining. Foreign Fair, Thy's travel-inspired fashion brand, launched in 2023. Its own customer base, its own supplier relationships, its own financial structure, its own network of collaborators and investors. Where does that brand stand right now? Who owns it? Who inherits it? Who benefits from it now that Thy is gone? And was there anyone in that brand's orbit whose financial position changed significantly the moment Thy Mitchell died? These are the questions that follow money. And money is almost always where the answers live. I want to go back one final time to Matthew's pharmaceutical career, because I think that chapter is the least examined and potentially the most important thread in this entire case. 14 years. Think about how much happens in 14 years at the executive level of a clinical research company. How many trials are run? How many investors are involved? How many outcomes are controlled or quietly buried? The liability that accumulates, the relationships built, the enemies made, the people who trusted you with outcomes worth millions of dollars and felt betrayed when those outcomes did not materialize. Clinical research is not a clean industry. It is built on hope and desperation. Patients who need treatments, investors who need returns, and executives who sit in the middle making decisions that affect both. And when those decisions go wrong, when a trial fails, when an investment evaporates, when a promise made in a boardroom cannot be kept, the people left holding the loss do not always respond with lawsuits. Sometimes they respond with other things entirely. What did Matthew Mitchell's exit from the Texas Center for Drug Development actually look like? Was it clean? Was it disputed? Were there people left behind who felt wronged when he walked away to go to culinary school? We do not know. Nobody has looked. And now, the word I promised you at the beginning of this video, akathisia. Akathisia is a medication-induced state of overwhelming internal agitation, not sadness, not quiet despair, a storm inside the body that the person experiencing it cannot escape, cannot explain, and cannot slow down. People who have survived it describe it as feeling like their skin is on fire from the inside, like they need to move but moving does not help, like the walls of their own mind are closing in at a speed that no rational thought can stop. And here is what the peer-reviewed science says. A comprehensive review of over 64,000 pages of clinical trial reports found that SSRIs, the class of antidepressants that includes Zoloft and Paxil, double the occurrence of behaviors leading to suicide and violence in adults with no prior psychiatric history. A forensic study examined 129 subjects prescribed psychiatric medication for psychosocial distress. 8 of those 129 people committed homicide while on the medication. 8 regular people who went to a doctor because they were struggling and left with a bottle, and a follow-up appointment in 6 weeks. The risk is highest in the first weeks, before the medication stabilizes, before the dose is calibrated. In that narrow, dangerous window between the first pill and the first follow-up, some people do not become calmer. They become something that neither they nor the people around them recognize. James Holmes opened fire in an Aurora, Colorado movie theater in 2012, killing 12 people. He was on Zoloft. No prior history of violence. His defense team argued the medication produced a psychotic state he could not control. Now here is something that came directly from inside the Houston community. Not from a press release. Not from a journalist. From someone who lives less than a quarter mile from that house on Kingston Street. Someone who personally knows 3 different people who own restaurants and knew both Matthew and Thy Mitchell very well. Knew them up close. In real life, inside the Houston food world that both of them called home. And what this person said is something the mainstream press has not had the courage to address. That both restaurants were doing very well. That the financial collapse narrative may not be the full picture. That the business was not the thing that was broken. But then this person said something else. That Matthew Mitchell's prescription history needs to be reviewed. That people recently prescribed antidepressants experience psychosis all the time. That this is one of the most underreported phenomena in American medicine. And that this person personally knows 4 different people who committed suicide after being recently prescribed Zoloft or Paxil. 4 people. 1 community. A quarter mile from that house. Now hold that alongside this. Matthew Mitchell was a former pharmaceutical CEO, a man who understood at a professional level the mechanism of action of every psychiatric medication on the market, a man who knew from inside that industry exactly what SSRIs do to the serotonin system in the first weeks, what happens when the dose is wrong, what akathisia feels like when it develops, and yet if he was prescribed one of those medications, if he was in that first week window, if he was experiencing what the research describes, his professional knowledge would have meant nothing, because akathisia does not negotiate with what you know. It overrides who you are. Now, layer the affair tip on top of that. If Matthew Mitchell discovered or was made to believe that the baby his wife was carrying was not his, while simultaneously experiencing the documented psychological effects of a newly prescribed psychiatric medication, then what happened on Sunday night stops being a mystery. It becomes a detonation, with a fuse that someone may have deliberately lit. A revelation, real or manufactured, true or planted, delivered to a man who was already inside the most dangerous pharmaceutical window in modern medicine. The perfect crime does not announce itself. It does not kick down doors or break windows or give neighbors something to call 911 about. The perfect crime looks like a tragedy that explains itself. Like a family found by a worried babysitter after a silence that lasted just long enough, like a welfare check, like a restaurant statement citing a criminal investigation, like a city that grieves for a week and moves on. The perfect crime looks exactly like this. And I'm Mitchell, who beat the odds, who built an empire, who made a joke about outliving her husband 10 days before she died, deserved a world that looked harder, that asked more questions, that did not accept the first answer it was handed, just because it was the most convenient one. So here is where I leave you tonight. And I want you to be completely honest in that comment section, because this community has caught things before that investigators missed. Real things, things that mattered. The word akathisia. If Matthew Mitchell was recently prescribed an antidepressant and entered that first week window, does that change how you see Sunday night? Does it make him less a monster and more of a victim of a system that handed him a bottle and walked away? The affair tip, unconfirmed, circulating, persistent. If the baby was not his, and that has not been confirmed, does that feel like a motive to you? Or does it feel like exactly the kind of information that someone would plant to manufacture one? The welfare check, the babysitter and the relative calling at the same time after 18 to 24 hours of silence. Does that feel spontaneous to you? Or does it feel coordinated? And the relative, which side of the family? And what do they know that has not been asked of them publicly? The pharmaceutical career. 14 years inside clinical research. An exit that nobody has examined. Enemies that nobody has named. Investors that nobody has traced. And the question that sits underneath all of it, the one that I cannot stop coming back to, if someone planned this, if someone knew this family well enough to walk into that house on a Sunday night and leave it looking like a husband who finally broke, how long had that plan been in motion? Was it already in motion when I posted that joke about outliving Matthew? Was it already in motion when she took my address shopping 2 days before she died? Was someone already watching that family while I was laughing in a fitting room and her daughter was rating her a 10 out of 10? Comment right now. Tell me everything. Tell me which angle broke something open for you. Tell me which thread you are pulling. Tell me if you think the right story is being told about what happened in that house, or if the investigation closed a door that should still be open. We say their names here. We do not move past them. Subscribe to Mystora Crimes right now. Hit that bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because when those prescription records surface, when those financial records are released, when the unnamed babysitter and the unnamed relative finally have their full story told, we will be right here, paying attention, asking the questions, for thy, for Maya, for Max, for the baby who never got a name. We do not look away here. See you on the next one.